everybody, welcome back to You Are Free TV. It is Tuesday, May 6th, 2025. We're about 9 hours out from the start of the conclave there in Vatican City in the Sistine Chapel. That'll be happening. And so we have a great interview today here with Leo Zagami and his new book, Exposing the Jesuits. And of course, he's expert on everything Vatican and what's going on now with the last Pope, the wrapping up of the popes. We're going to find out from Leo in a moment. I just want to start by saying thank you to everybody who supports the channel, and I have a little bit of housekeeping on that before I bring Leo in. Basically, I want to let people know You Are Free TV winners from April are Patricia in Yimiyahu. Patricia in Yimiyahu, congratulations on winning the C60 Evo. So psyched for you guys. And I want to say thank you so much to Janet, Sally, Kendra. Thank you, Kendra. Thank you, Zoe. And thank you, Joette and Nancy, all of you all being supporters for, just help me out. I so appreciate it. And there's a couple action points here. We're almost here bringing Leo in, but this is really important. Speaking of the conclave, repealthedeal.org, repealthedeal.org. This is Liz Yore doing heavy lifting here to do with wanting to repeal the CCP deal done with the Vatican. Masterminded by that dead criminal pedophile Ted McCarrick. And of course, Leo will be talking about this for sure, but you want to go to repealthedeal.org and sign the petition right away. They're trying to get a huge influx of Christians to get in there and really try to stand up against this Jesuit Vatican CCP Red Dragon takeover. So get in there. Today is the time to do it right now. And also the other thing I have to do for action is Ed Martin. We need Martin as the U.S. Attorney of D.C. I need you to go to 202-224-3121 and call your senators right now today, because if he doesn't get on to the docket for this week to be confirmed in the Senate, he's not going to get in, at least not right away. And we need Ed Martin right away. He's the hero we need, U.S. Attorney of D.C., the most important U.S. Attorney in the country. So, okay, those are our action points. And now we're going to bring in Leo, and we're going to talk all things Vatican. Hey, Leo, welcome back.
Thank you for having me on. And of course, it's a pleasure in these hours that are leading to the conclave, another pivotal moment in Vatican history. And as you know, I have in Synchronicity, which was I guess, orchestrated by God, at the same time brought out my new book, Volume 12, the final installment of my confessions dedicated to the Jesuits. This is a very important book because it completes the Illuminati Confession series. It's entitled History, Secret Societies, and the Politics of the Jesuit, the New World Order, and the Luciferian Court. And I guess that you can read this on its own without reading the others. But I guess once you read this one, you are probably going to be inspired to read also the other volumes. This is the most important because it's the controllers of the control, the controllers of those who control, is the all-seeing eye within the pyramid, is the top of the top, and there we find, of course, the infamous Jesuit general, otherwise known as the Black Pope, which is the one who has ultimately decided who is going to also be the next white Pope. We know that we had the first Jesuit in history as a Pope with Jorge Mario Bergoglio. We saw what kind of fraudulent church he brought forward. There is no need to wonder who is going to win, because he nominated 80% of the conclave, and so it's of course going to be a choice in line with his Vatican II mission. But of course, here we will discuss a little bit the whole thing. This is a book, by the way, it's not only a history book.
Let me jump in real quick, Leo, because I know you're just like a racehorse. Once the gates open, you'll just go. And I want to create just a little bit of orientation here. So we have the conclave coming tonight. Like you said, you have this God miraculous thing, like your book is coming out right now. That's the most important crux in history, just a beautiful blessing. And then we have, of course, Trump coming out, right, and trolling everybody with his Pope meme picture. And I want to I want to kind of jump in here a little bit before you go into the full context of the Society of Jesus and the history of the Jesuits. And
well, I mean, this book, I wanted to just point it out. It's not just a history book, because we know that Trump has been with the Jesuits studying for 2 years. We know that the Jesuits after Vatican II took control of the Vatican, and also they are behind the infamous Vatican-China deal, which is probably going to influence very much this conclave. So
yeah.
I guess I summarized it.
Right. And one thing that you bring up in the book is how Trump has been resisting and fighting the Jesuits from way back to his college days. And yes, that he's aware of this order. He's aware of the control of the Jesuits at the top of the pyramid.
Like I stated in my book, people like me or Trump who have actually studied with the Jesuits, because both me and Trump have studied philosophy with a Jesuit professor. And so that means learning really what a Jesuitism is all about. You need to know the enemy in order to fight it. Trump didn't give in to their offers to join on campus two of the most prestigious secret societies, which of course were co-founded with the Jesuits by various students, and that still are of great importance in Fordham. So he gave up on the idea of joining them simply because he didn't embrace their ideals. And this is pretty clear from his whole career as a businessman and as a politician. And the way they are fighting him now, it's on all those points that he didn't embrace in Fordham. But actually in my book, I have testimony of people who criticize the fact, of course, they stand on the left, they stand with the Democrats, that Trump didn't embrace the Jesuit values even after going to school. For them, it's a little bit like, it's a negative thing to not embrace their values. And it's very rare. It means that you haven't been brainwashed. And that's happened, like I said, with me back in the days when I studied, and with Trump. And I mean, I think that people like Trump, who know what the enemy is all about, are not just posting a meme, which doesn't have any sense to post a meme also on the official White House socials, profiles and stuff. I think that it's more important to say, like I stated on leozagami.com, this is a message, a clear message to a conclave, which is in the hands of those forces that have always ostracized and fought Trump. So either the CCP or the World Economic Forum, forces of globalization that have, of course, in some way tried to bring Trump on their side, but when they saw it's not possible to bring Trump on their side, then they fight him on every policy, starting with the immigration, because that's a very strong Jesuit, has a very strong Jesuit link. I explained it very much in the book. Pope Francis, one of the last things he did before being brought to hospital was actually to address the bishops here in the United States regarding immigration, to nominate bishops who were in line with his open borders policy, which is also, of course, of Soros. But we saw Alex Soros with what reverence he went and visited with Bill Clinton the Vatican. So here we are really in the heart of the beast.
Yes, absolutely. And also, of course, the massive human and child trafficking that is being run by the Jesuits and out of the Catholic bishops and out of the Catholic charities and the Lutherans, all of it. So that, that nominate the new guy who's just moved into DC, is it McClellan, McCarrick's mentee, who destroyed the diocese in San Diego, did all the trafficking of the children and the migrants in San Diego, and also went bankrupt in the church, in the diocese, rather than pay out the money to all the abuse victims of the Catholic Church in that county. So that's who's now going to be moving.
Well, I mean, Robert McElroy of San Diego, definitely one of the leftist-leaning cardinals nominated by Pope Francis, who, like I explained earlier, rigged this conclave in his image, but also in the image of the Jesuits, because we have to understand, that Pope Francis was first of all a Jesuit, and then he was a Pope. He took on the papacy with the blessing of the Jesuit order. In an unprecedented move, he regained, let's say, familiarity and also the trust of the Jesuit general after he had betrayed them himself during the dirty war in Argentina, when he embraced the P2 Lodge, which was, of course, a more conservative-leaning form of Freemasonry. And that helped him eventually to make his career. But at one point, like I explained in my book, there was a turning, a moment which decided the future of Bergoglio, which was, of course, decided by the same Gallen Mafia operating in Switzerland, but also by the fact he renounced the offer of Joseph Ratzinger through Tarcisio Bertone, at the time Secretary of State, to commission the Jesuits. And that is the second time in history that a Pope, and that was Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, was trying to do what John Paul II had already tried in the early 80s, to put the Jesuits finally under the control of the Vatican, rather than the Vatican being under the control of the Jesuits. It didn't really work out. It didn't really work out. And in fact, now we have, you see, all these cardinals that are, of course, 163 were created by Pope Francis, but we know that the ones participating, of course, are much less, because those have to be less than 80 years of age, and they are approximately 80%, which is, I think, about 108 cardinals that have been nominated by Bergoglio. But if you want to reach the quorum, that's plenty. I mean, 80%. You need really, in reality, you, with already 75%, you could nominate a new pope. The whole thing, you know, that they are filtering through the media is the inspiration from the Holy Spirit coming through the Sistine Chapel vault, and then, oh, wow.
Yeah,
and
right.
then, you know, we put these boats that, of course, are made in the name, because there is a rite, a ritual that needs to be followed for the conclave. It's a rite of the conclave, which is given to each cardinal that he has to follow in every single possible way. And then at that point, you find yourself in this room, which is, of course, historically known as one of the most wonderful places. You know, artistically, Michelangelo can't be beaten. I mean, you are in the Sistine Chapel. So they have 3 cardinals who are the ones who are monitoring the votes. So you vote on a piece of paper, you seal it, then you go in front of these 3 cardinals that are verifying that the whole operation is done in a, let's say, between brackets, honest way. Now, in regards to how this is going to proceed, we're going to have a first scrutiny tomorrow, I mean, in a few hours, and that is at 4:30 local time in Italy. Then there's going to be at least 2 scrutinies on the successive day, on the 8th. And I think, by what I've heard, it's not going to be a long conclave. They should be done by the end of the 8th, and probably they're going to come out with Habemus Papam by the end of the of May 8th. We don't know that for sure, of course. Everything is possible. They're trying to move the media, especially in Italy, push them to you know, all kinds of let's say speculations, drama, make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit like the movie Conclave. But in any case, the truth, the reality of all this is that Francis and the Jesuits have managed, for the first time in history, to completely rig a conclave against any conservative force. Now,
can you explain that to people, so, you know, for them to understand? So there, in your opinion, there's no, it's already a set deal. And I'd love to hear, do you think that's going to be Tagle to try to bring out the red dragon
aspect? It's either Tagle, or it's either Turkson, or the card. It's either Tagle or somebody from Africa. Could be even the Archbishop there in Morocco, which is a favorite. He will unify a little because he has some, I think, South American, or Spanish. He kind of unifies both the content. But in any case, it's not going to be a white man. It's not going to be a European. I mean, I don't want to be, in any case, this is not about racism, though. This is not about saying, you know, that you shouldn't elect somebody from another ethnicity. It is about, though, the fact that the policies of Pope Francis are extremely woke. And of course, Cardinal Tagle is a Jesuit student, somebody who worked for the Jesuit media in the Filipinos, in his country.
And he has Chinese, even though he's Filipino, he has Chinese descent.
Absolutely.
Right?
In fact, he is a very strong proponent and supporter of the China-Vatican deal.
Right.
Now,
why don't you explain to people what that is, the China-Vatican deal?
Well, I mean, I think that they can get the best explanation if they get my book, Volume 12.
Yes.
In any case, we are talking here about a deal that we don't really know for sure what it entails. I mean, it's a deal that was done secretly. We know that the main thing is that those bishops that were nominated by the Chinese Patriotic Catholic Association, which have in reality no real standing in the church, if we want to talk about episcopal lineagism, because the church is made out of bishops, archbishops, priests that follow an episcopal line that in theory goes all the way back to St. Peter. Now, as artificial and constructed as this line might be, because there is a lot that we're going to say also, and I wrote about in regards to the fact that last year the primacy of the papacy has been already put into discussion by Pope Francis and the Jesuits, who have already prepared a time bomb ticking that will eventually be revealed by the new Pope, who will then step down as figure of as primate of all, as central key figure of all Christians, just equiparating the Bishop of Rome to all the other bishops as the opening line to the unifications of all Christians. In regards to
so Leo, so what you're saying is the Pope's going to step down and end the papacy in order to unite all of Christianity, supposedly.
Well, that is a first step to go to.
But what about all the Orthodox? Might have something to say about that.
No, they don't have something to say once you step down, because then at that point you are equiparating, for example, the Patriarch of Constantinople, or I make an example, the Kirill of Moscow with the Pope in Rome. That is basically stepping down from his primacy role, means becoming an orthodox reality, even if it's no longer orthodox, the Catholic faith in no way, shape, or form, because it's become an LGBTQ whatever endeavor, fueled by the Jesuits with a lot of lovely pink and unicorns and all that. But in any case, when it comes down to what we are seeing now, is a church that is definitely not going to go back from the policies, progressive, the transformative, Masonic, also policies of Vatican II. Pope Francis said, we are only halfway through with the policies of Vatican II. They will need probably various decades to implement them all. But once you implement all those policies, basically you're left with no Catholic Church at all. You're left with something which is going to be more like a one-world religion, where everybody, even outside of Christianity, you will have that unification that he, of course, mentioned in Fratelli Tutti, the encyclica which he published, which was very much Masonic in essence, in the middle of a very difficult moment, which was at the start of the pandemic. So the Pope has done everything from the beginning of 2019 to merge with Muslims, Sunni, Shiites, and then, of course, Buddhists, Jews, everything. But that is part of the One World Religion project of the Jesuits, who are helped in their endeavors by the Freemasons. In this new book of mine, I explain how the Freemasons, as the Illuminati, are part of the Luciferian court of the Jesuits. They're the ones in charge. And I also explain how after the Second Vatican Council, there was especially one figure who has reshaped the the church more than anybody else, and that is Padre Pedro Arrupe, who a lot of people will probably not know, who is Pedro Arrupe. Pedro Arrupe was a Spaniard, just like the founder of the Jesuits, Ignacio Loyola, who after the Second Vatican Council, at the end of the 60s, has embraced fully the values of Vatican II, but has gone, instead of doing what the rest of the church did, to kind of, very slowly implement things because the face of the church is very slow. Pedro Arrupe was very much on Marxist lines and wanted to spread the new gospel of Kumbaya, Jesus coming around the world with the church transformed from the traditional Latin Mass into this thing, this mishmash of people playing guitars and stuff.
Liberation theology and
liberation theology,
and also,
and then you have charismatic, also the charismatic movement that became suddenly very important, and of course influenced people also like Bergoglio. So this is the church that we have today is a different church from the way it was before Vatican II, and it will never go back to that, because the forces that made Vatican II were the forces of transformation, of masonry. Here I have a pin with a compass and square on an American flag. I'm wearing it because, of course, I want to launch a very strong signal here that we know exactly what you have been doing. And at the moment, the whole situation in regards to revealing certain truths within Freemasonry is being discussed in the archives in Washington in particular, where they are making research which is corroborating the evidence which I brought forward. I spoke with a eminent and very important Masonic historian over time the other day, who confirmed that what I said here in regards to the very nature of this ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, which, as you know, is the most important rite here in the United States of America, most influential, that has Jesuit origins. And those Jesuit origins, of course, go back to a lodge operating in the 1730s, goes back to Claremont, which was a college, an institution of education for that the Jesuits eventually brought forward also as one of their bastions, where they were experimenting with the first people who, of course, were bringing forward the so-called Age of Enlightenment. Now, the Age of Enlightenment might seem like a product of laicity, of people outside of the church, but in reality, like I explained in my new book, the Age of Enlightenment was also facilitated by the cultural exchanges that the Jesuits did with places like China, out of all places. And what, for example, the Jesuits that translated the first edition of The Art of War of Sun Tzu and published in 1772, a year before they were actually suppressed. And this, of course, was an important publication that helped people like Napoleon, out of all people. So I think that is important to understand that historically here in the year 2025, with this new Pope, we are not going to have anything going back to the past, because the traditionalists, the ones that, for example, went to Mar-a-Lago with the statue of the Virgin Mary to bless the place and exercise it, and they are all traditional priests, and of course, all people who are on similar lines to what also, J.D. Vance is a traditionalist in his view of Catholicism. But the problem is that they are a minority. Now, we had Mike Pence, who betrayed Trump.
Yeah.
And he did it 1 year to the date, exactly 1 year after being with Pope Francis, because he's a Jesuit agent, Mike Pence, and a Catholic who embraces the values of Vatican II. Now, I hope that doesn't happen with J.D. Vance.
I think that I think the jury's out on that, don't you? I'm very skeptical. I'm very suspicious and skeptical of J.D. Vance, although I have a healthy
Well,
suspicion.
in this book, I explain how his stand on certain things was actually very traditional. He talked also about the Latin Mass, not that he, specifically said he's practicing it, but he was obviously somebody who was embracing it. Then he talked about Saint Thomas Aquinas' Ordo Amoris, which is a specific publication by a very eminent figure, as you know, of the church, which himself described the way that you should protect your neighbor, your fellow citizens, and not be open to what instead is the current invasion that is being pushed by the Jesuits, that of course has facilitated the birth and the development of gangs here in the United States, and also the birth of them in Central and South America. Because guys, if we have to be really honest about what is happening with the current immigration crisis, it's of Jesuit making. I mean, is of Catholic making. Those NGOs are Catholic who support these scumbags coming into our country and then
make tons of money. Of
money. And when for example Trump went and offered his help to the Mexican president, another Jesuit in disguise, because then what I explain here in this book is that of course you have the four vows, Jesuits of the four. I mean, you have four vows. You have the Jesuit of the first three vows, then you have the ultimate Jesuit who takes the fourth vow, but then you have also the apparent laicity who has embraced Jesuitism in secret, who responds directly to the Jesuit general, and those as the fifth-class Jesuits. And people like Nancy Pelosi are fifth-class Jesuits, people like Bill Clinton, but there is many others. You don't necessarily even have to be Catholic. Problem here, because they don't care. They just care that you have actually a certain power and influence in society, and they actually going to reward you with even more power and influence if you serve them well, like Nancy Pelosi has done for a number of years. So in this conclave, we are going to see more of the same, but actually we're going to see even worse, because the next pope, either being Tagle, who is a guy who has also admitted 6 years ago during an interview that he was brought to the priesthood with trickery by the Jesuits.
Figures.
He thought he was actually studying become medicine, and they told, yeah, don't worry, go to this Jesuit university. And when he arrived there, he suddenly was in front of a document which was signing, which said, so what is your, what is your, I mean, are you here because you have a vocation? What is, why are you here? And then he understood that in reality, the Jesuit priest who had sent him there, and he admitted that to him, was wanting to break his mindset. So he will leave the idea of becoming a doctor in medicine and instead becoming a doctor in theology, becoming a church doctor, as they say in Rome. And he embraced after the idea, even if initially he was himself, he admitted he was rather disappointed that he had been brought to this choice of priesthood with trickery. Because, I mean, you should, when, for example, I was studying with the Jesuits, and this is a photo here. This is me, and this is one of the most known guys who, during the Second World War, fought Benito Mussolini on behalf of the Jesuits, and he did it by saying that Jesus was a communist. Imagine what kind of school I went to. I myself was obviously opposing all this all the time. I got in trouble. A lot of times I got in trouble with the Jesuit professor, though, that taught me philosophy and pedagogy, was in the end somebody who teach me a lot of things, though I must say that at times I didn't go along with what he was proposing, and that's because I didn't bow down to their mindset. A lot of my fellow students you see in this pic I showed you, nowadays they are all very subservient to the church. They're much in line with Jesuitism. They are slaves of this whole thing, and I'm of course in contact with some of them, and I can confirm you that is the case. I mean, if you don't break your chains with them, and at one point I had to go to my father and I had to tell him, listen, I'm gonna leave this school because they are brainwashing everybody, and I'm not in line with what they're saying and what they are preaching, and their whole thing it's wrong, because I don't want to be just a puppet in the Jesuit hands. And my father said, okay, and I went and changed, because at one point I couldn't go along with what they were proposing. I mean, it was just like this indoctrination constantly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the values that they were preaching were not my values, and I was like, guys, I don't want to become a robot in this in the hand. I don't want to be part of the system. I remember bringing in the equation during my discussion with my father, Kafka, in the process. I didn't want to be simply a guy who becomes part of this system. And so that's it. Yeah. But the same can be said for, of course, Donald J. Trump, because he refused. And once you refuse, they get very aggressive, against you when they can't have you in their fold. I must say that initially they tried to, tell me, no, but you can work with us, you can do this in the media. I started when I was 13 with the Catholic media. I went on to work with Rete Blu, that later on will become SAT 2000, the TV of the of the Bishop Conference of Italy, basically, which is a very important TV currently still. And Monsignor Mario Pieracci told me, but continue, we work together, this, that, and all the other. And I went on until I was about 18, 19. When I was 19, I arrived to a point I was like, no, this is not. I went to work for people who were not putting this hideous ideology, and I wanted to enter, of course, commercial radios and TVs that were not with the same kind of because the thing is, when you see Trump, of course, today, what is he fighting, really? He's fighting for education, a brainwashed educational system that, regardless of the fact that is or is not formally in the hands of the Jesuits, is always in the hands of the Jesuits. Yeah. Okay? So it doesn't mean that you are in Georgetown or in Harvard, and in Harvard you're less Jesuit than one in Harvard you're less Jesuit than in Georgetown. Of course, in Georgetown you're totally Jesuit. Or, that's like being in a seminary almost. But in Harvard is no different, because these people are molded and shaped in a way that the educational system has to fit the system that they have built in hundreds of years. Then what else is Trump fighting? Trump is fighting, for example, the leftist politics on transgenderism, the LGBT movement, which is not really, it's not like Trump opposes the LGBT in the sense, he makes it very clear when he's putting the Village People as his theme song, that he doesn't have anything against the gays, and he was a guy who always had no problems in New York and the homosexual community, never had anything against him until he became instead a candidate for the Republican Party, because, they have built this artificial construct that the Republicans are anti-gay, anti-LGBT and all that, which is artificial. In reality, there is no such thing anymore. We are in the year 2025, and what you do in your own bed is your own business. I don't care. Of course, religiously speaking, that's another thing. That's why I'm against very much the LGBTQ priests, because they are hypocrites who should be embracing celibacy, not going after little children or youngsters in their seminaries. In any case, Trump is opposing also the European Union, but the European Union, like I explained in my latest book, is a creation of the Jesuits, just like the Club Bilderberg. You see, we had in the past people who talk about the Bilderberg Club, like Daniel Estulin, who wrote a whole book, which I have here.
He's fantastic.
He has not mentioned once the word Jesuit. He has not mentioned once the fact that Ratzinger Joseph Ratzinger was a seminarian of the Jesuits and was one of the main founders and creator. I mean, there is not really a discussion. He never really brings forward all this.
Interesting.
Because he's
interesting. He's an interesting person.
Instead, in my book, I give the whole story of how Joseph Ratzinger, with Freemasonry, with the Jesuits, with the MI, what we call now the MI6, the British Secret Service. He was also a patriot, Polish patriot, but also communist. I mean, Joseph Ratzinger was definitely a character which, without him, there would not have been the Bilderberg Club. So I don't understand what kind of research people like Daniel Estuling do. I mean,
well, maybe he's got some interesting allegiances, shall we say? Let's just throw that out there. He might have some allegiances in that department.
Well, because in fact, if you see his story, he's very much a leftist. This guy was a guy who wrote a book against Donald J. Trump, and suddenly he's on InfoWars talking about Trump. I mean, you know, this is not. You have to be coherent in your life. You have to be transparent. You can't be an hypocrite. So I criticize that kind of hypocrisy in researchers, though I love some of his research in the past, also the Tavistock Institute and other subjects. I think that is incomplete. I'm not saying that it's wrong what he has been writing or saying about the Bilderberg, but if you are only scratching the surface without going into the reasons why it was shaped and the people involved, I explain how the Jesuits and the Freemasons started to meet up during the phase where we were not certain if the Nazis were conquered the world or not. So the Jesuits were standing with both. They were going into Russia with the SS to support, of course, and try to convert the Orthodox, just like they're doing now, supporting Ukraine and bombing the Orthodox Russian churches, the ones that are loyal to Russia. And it happened only a couple of days ago, the last church that was bombed by these people. So we are talking about also an Orthodox church. When we talk about the Orthodoxy and the Orthodox Church, we're talking about an Orthodox Church which now has as a last man standing, who is not under the control of the Jesuits, Patriarch Kirill in Moscow. But when it comes to all the other churches worldwide, or so-called Orthodox, yes, they might be very respectful of certain values that the Catholic Church has totally abandoned. I mean, of course, people join Orthodoxy also here in America because it's more masculine. But in reality, you will find yourself in the hands of the same people you are trying to escape. Because that is what I said before regarding also the document that was published by the Vatican on the 13th of June last year, which is going to lead to a radical transformation of the papacy in future years.
Interesting. Wow. So yeah, so in your opinion, it's really only the Russian-based patriarch that is that the Moscow patriarch is the only last man standing of integrity.
Well, that is why the in a way, you know, Francis tried to get Kirill closer and closer. He never really managed, but he tried. But in reality, he's the last man standing, because the Patriarch of Constantinople is a completely a tool of NATO, is a tool of Freemasonry. And I'm sad to say that most of the autocephalous churches of Orthodoxy, they don't reflect anymore. I mean, they reflect, of course, sometimes the values, most of them, but that is, you know, it's becoming an external factor. It's not becoming. I mean, we know there's been a lot of criticism, for example, about Kirill because maybe he's passed as a KGB collaborator, blah blah blah. Having said that, he's a close ally of Vladimir Putin. He's of course loyal to his long-standing support for Orthodoxy, which started the day after the Soviet Union fall, because I was in Russia from the middle of the 90s, working also with the Russian Ministry of Culture, and I witnessed myself queues of people in Russian Orthodox churches suddenly. And of course, also a lot of money being poured into the Russian Orthodox Church by a lot of Russian mafiosi sinners have to save their, I don't know. I mean, anyway.
Save their souls.
Yeah, Bartolomeo I of Constantinople is somebody who definitely might have an integrity in his own position in the Eastern Orthodox Church, but as a spiritual leader. But at the same time, unfortunately, is politically compromised, no matter what they say, and that's why the Ukrainian Church shifted from Moscow to him, because he is like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's like saying, okay, we give you the Western version.
Yeah, the Cultural Revolution version.
Yeah, well, I'm very sorry that unfortunately people have a lot of confusion when it comes down to the religious subjects, and especially when it comes down to Orthodox, but also the Catholic Church. They tend to mix everything up especially when they don't study theology, they don't study the history of religion. This book is a bestseller now in the history of religion.
Yeah.
But to do that, I had to wait many years and have the confidence, literally speaking, to bring out a book to challenge the Jesuits. Because for me, of course, you're going to challenge the Jesuits if you don't know what you're talking about. These are the guys in charge of the science of the church. These are the educational masters. These are the people who teach you. And they're going to say, oh, this is not true. This is not true. This is not. Instead, you can go and screw yourself, dear Jesuits, because this is hard facts and is nailing you down. It's the last nail in the coffin of Pope Francis. And in fact, no, because I think that is very important. Like when we saw, for example, Pope Francis with Raul Castro. Raul Castro is a guy who openly said, I would have loved to be a Jesuit, but he was a fifth-class Jesuit. And Fidel Castro, same thing. But at the same time, because of the relationship that Cuba has with Russia, Raul Castro was awarded with Fidel the Order of St. Daniel in Moscow on behalf of Patriarch Alexei II at the time. But having said that, today, Cuba is a mess. Is a mess. Cuba is a real mess. And tell you the truth, I don't think it's going to get any better because, I mean, we saw what happened in 2016, in February 2015, Pope Francis met with Kirill in the international airport near Havana in Cuba. That is very important. Because, see, Cuba is a Jesuit stronghold. It's a place.
Say more about that. Tell people more about that.
Well, it's a place that has maintained their Freemasonry also. Has never, on the contrary of other countries, which when they become dictatorships, remove Freemasonry for fear it could actually become a danger to their dictatorship. Cuba's Freemasonry, no. It was so Jesuit in nature. It was so much, it was fueled with all the Santeria bullshit, animist rubbish, all that, because they are connected also with all that. And so in the end, Fidel Castro was awarded a 33rd degree, Che Guevara, everybody, and it stayed there as this way in which they can use Freemasonry. Is something they can use. But at the same time, the Jesuits have maintained a position, of course, always, you know, officially with the Catholic Church of being against Freemasonry. But in reality, after the Vatican II, like I explained in my book, there were Jesuits that were openly talking about joining Freemasonry, or that now that we have Vatican II, Jesuitism and Freemasonry could become one almost. And there is testimonies in my book about Jesuits of the fourth vow, which is now very important to explain that.
Okay, wait. Can you go into the well, after you explain that,
yeah.
Can you then move out to this concept of, okay, the Jesuits created the EU, pretty much Davos is the EU.
Davos is another creation, like I explained in volume 7 of my question. It's a creation of people who have inspired Klaus Schwab and the Club of Rome, which are all inspired by the Jesuits.
Yes, so I know. Like, let me just, I'm trying to create a context for people to understand, like, the larger picture of how this all becomes this then fifth vow crowd, the fourth vow crowd, and how these are all the same people making up this network, right? That is this greater Jesuit network. And Trump's come out very clearly and said the EU was created to parasitize and take down the United States of America. And you discuss that in your book as well.
Now, so think about it. Every single enemy of Trump is a Jesuit creation. China.
Globally. Can you explain that to people, that whole construct that I just kind of laid out there, like and then with the vows and the people and the World Economic Forum crowd?
To summarize the values, Trump is fighting what? He's fighting the Democratic Party, which is the political arm of the Jesuits, and they have showed that over and over again. I mean, aside from Nancy Pelosi, we had the second Catholic president in history, and it was the biggest disaster also in American history. Joe Biden, who, by the way, like I also mentioned in my book, was also awarded a Masonic initiation just before leaving the presidency as an accomplishment, almost, of all his work given by the principal Freemasons, which are themselves controlled by the Jesuits. The LGBT movement, hostility towards Trump, is also part of the Jesuit policy, because the Jesuits have created an organization called Outreach with the Father Martin, this guy who is very flamboyant and openly in support of the LGBTQ community, and has created an organization for that. Then we have Trump, of course, fighting the European Union, which, like we said, is a Jesuit creation. And of course, when I say Jesuit creation, people will say, oh, he just says that. No, in my book, there's a whole chapter which tells you, name by name, date by date, how things evolved. And so, what we are saying today, and this has to be very clear for our viewers, is scratching the surface, because when you have a book which is this big, you can only scratch the surface of this information. Then we have Trump fighting, of course, China's globalization, the rise of Shanghai, which is also part of the Jesuits. They invested, France, through the Jesuits, invested money, and the Jesuits invested time and resources. And today, the headquarters of the Jesuits is basically next door to the headquarters of the most fierce cyber intelligence unit of the Chinese military, which is in Shanghai. So, I mean, we're talking about the guys who hack all our computers daily from China, come from that unit, which is in the same neighborhood of the Jesuits, and many Jesuits come in and out of it regularly. Then we have the Jesuits have been in China for 5 centuries. So let me also make that clear. This book brings you that. That's why this book has an historical approach, because you need to know where it all started 500 years ago in order to understand where they are now. And they definitely are in a special place with China, and they always have been. Then you have, of course, the ultimate control of technocracy, the AI, which has been discussed in recent years at the Vatican. But that, is a subject which I've discussed in volume 6.6, volume 7, and volume 9, which is the trilogy of Cyber Satan. But in this book, I eventually discuss what Pope Francis' idea was, and the Jesuit idea of technocracy, and how they came together with Pierre Teilhard de Chardin with the noosphere concept, of course, which is pioneering what later became the internet. So, the Jesuits are not about bringing you the gospel of Jesus Christ.
What are they about?
They're about bringing you the power of Rome from ancient times, the power of Rome, which was the power of the biggest and most fierce empire the world had ever seen, which eventually will crumble under the barbarians, but never really ended. And in fact, when it comes down to the burial place of Pope Francis, which is outside the Vatican, as you know, there is a specific reason why the Pope decided to get buried there. It's not just by chance.
Tell us.
Well, first of all, the burial was financed, like I explained, by former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, who left it also in the, I mean, this is a specific thing that was also left in the will of Pope Francis. A mysterious donor pays for the burial. And that mysterious donor was a brother from the P2 Lodge, because he had joined the P2 Lodge. So that is never, you know, he always stayed a Freemason, as much as he was a Jesuit. But as I always explain, the Jesuits who become Freemasons will always be, first of all, Jesuits and then Freemasons, because they know very well that ultimately the Freemasons are always controlled by the Jesuits.
Interesting.
So there was a moment in which Bergoglio, I guess, as a father provincial in the end of the 70s in Argentina, didn't have that very clear, and it got him in trouble, because two of his Jesuits were kidnapped. He gave up on them for 5 months. So they were tortured and left in this island, blindfolded and all that. Then he eventually asked a favor from his brothers of the P2, and they were released. But that brought a lot of anger from the Jesuit general Pedro Arrupe. And also the following general, Hans Covenbach, was absolutely against Bergoglio. He wrote a note when they wanted to make him bishop. I think when they wanted to make him already auxiliary bishop of Buenos Aires, there was a note that was written by Hans Covenbach suggesting that they don't make Bergoglio a bishop. But of course, it was ignored, because he was being made a bishop by those forces, those Masonic forces, who were awarding them with a bishophood. And I told you, only later on, Hans Covenbach and Bergoglio kind of got back together when Bergoglio said, I'm not going to become a commissioner of the Jesuits. And that was when he got back into line with the Jesuits. He was at that point also supported strongly by the St. Gallen Mafia, which had a strong Jesuit presence, and his own mentor, Cardinal Maria Martini. Like I explained in this book, the St. Gallen Mafia was a group very influential.
Yes, let us know more about them. That'd be great.
It doesn't exist anymore, because they eventually ceased their activities after the election of Pope Francis. In 2014, they dismantled all their activities. That started in the second half of the 1990s. At that time, the church was still under John Paul II, not fully embracing those Vatican II progressive ideals they would have liked to embrace. So they had to build a group of Freemason cardinals and influential people from the church that had a strong connection with Freemasonry. At the same time, they were very much a strong connection with Jesuit, with the Jesuit order. And they did it in St. Gallen, because St. Gallen was a very particular place. It's a place with a very strong Masonic presence. It is a place where, after his first visit in 1949, Theodore McCarrick got radically and mysteriously transformed. And I explain in this book why also, because in that period, the disciples of Aleister Crowley had built there near St. Gallen one of their monasteries, the Abbey of Thelema, and they were kind of encouraging the study of Crowley's branch of Gnosticism, which is one of the most insidious and most perverse ones, as you know. And so Theodore McCarrick embraced those values that later on became embraced by the so-called Pink Palaces seminaries in the 60s, when the church, you see, a lot of people think that the priests were always homosexuals and always pedophiles. Yes, they might have been a minority that was. But when they became the majority of the church, that happened in the 1960s.
Yeah.
When the seminaries were deliberately prone to accept people who were perverts in nature, who should have never become priests. the church today is in trouble, and even the Jesuit order and every other order in the Catholic Church, because they have a large number of abuse cases that, of course, they need to compensate and are sending bankrupt entire dioceses, or they ignore because, of course, they can't afford to pay. Well, all this happens because in the 1960s, the Vatican II opening led to this disaster.
Yes, absolutely.
And embracing, of course, also the values of Alice Crowley. Because Alice Crowley, people think of the occultist Alice Crowley. They think of the Freemason, fringe Freemason / Illuminati. They think about somebody who was, of course, had a lot of occult knowledge, but Crowley himself was obsessed with the church. He was obsessed with the Gnostic bishophood that he was entitled once he founded and took over, let's say, the Ecclesia Gnostica Cattolica with a legitimate, between brackets, lineage that came from sources that inevitably leads us to another Jesuit, which is Daniel in France, a former Jesuit who left the Jesuits and then started these sciences, where he eventually received, I don't know, some messages from some bishops, Catars, Albigeans, that then granted him power to start a Gnostic church in modern times, which became, of course, associated to various rites of Freemasonry and various groups like the Martinists and others. So the Gallen Mafia is something that wanted to bring a progressive reform to the church. Yeah. They even attempted in 2005, when the Conclave elected Joseph Ratzinger, to elect Jorge Mario Bergoglio. But like in my book, I explained that didn't happen. Bergoglio refused. Bergoglio was terrorized by being elected in 2005 because he had way too many skeletons in the closet. Mm-hmm. And of course, he didn't fully reconcile yet with the Jesuit order. The moment in which he reconciled fully with the Jesuit order, he knew he had the cards to dethrone Ratzinger. And in an unprecedented move, as you know, Ratzinger gave up. But how did he give up? He gave up because, like I explained in Pope Francis the Last Pope, which is another bestseller I wrote years ago, Cardinal Maria Martini from the St. Gallen Mafia went to him in the summer of 2012 and told him it's about time to leave. And you have, to leave because they knew, of course, they had a lot of stuff which they could use to blackmail Ratzinger in typical Jesuit style. They operate as secret agents. You see, we talked about the Jesuits as part of an establishment which accepted them in 1540 when the Counter-Reformation was starting to really become the main obsession of the Catholic Church. I mean, you had Martin Luther, you had then the English Church, the Anglican Church that was becoming a real problem. So when the founder of the Jesuits brought this idea of the fourth vow.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear about this.
Well, the text of the fourth vow, which Saint Ignacio Loyola proposed to the Pope, convinced the Pope that this could be a great order, because in the fourth vow that not all Jesuits accept, because a lot of Jesuits accept the other vows of poverty, of this and that, but they don't accept the ultimate obedience to the sovereign pontiff, because it says, I further promise a special obedience to the sovereign pontiff in regards to missions according to the same apostolic letters and the constitutions. What does it mean? It means that when they lay down and they become fourth vow Jesuits, you can actually ask them to kill and to do things against the very faith you have embraced, and they will have to accept because they took the fourth vow. So they become ideal secret agents. That's why 20 years later, the Vatican also founded their own secret service, thanks to the Jesuits, called the Holy Alliance. Initially, today it's called the Entity. And that's where the Jesuits found their ideal place also, where they could use their deceptive techniques known as pious frauds. meaning anything goes in a very Machiavellic way as long the purpose justifies the means, basically. Just to make it very, very simple. So this is what is, you see, when the Jesuits got accepted, remember that the founder had been arrested several times by the Inquisition, but the Pope said, maybe these are the ideal people to help me also fight this reformation, because they are so insidious, so well skilled in the occult, so well knowledgeable about sciences. They have, their mission is to immediately go to places like China, India, Japan. I mean, these were like, I mean, for the Pope, this was like a blessing. They were, wow, let's do it. Even if, like I said, he had been arrested several times before, and he had been reprimanded by the church, because before becoming a priest, they told them, you can't do these kind of things. You can't teach these kind of things. And what was he teaching? He was teaching the Alumbrados. Alumbrados were a sect, the Illuminati of the time. Alumbrados means the Illuminati. They were embracing things like Kabbalah, Islamic mysticism, Gnosticism, and so they were completely heretic in nature. But that wasn't a problem, because the moment in which they gave they gave these constitutions to the Pope was like, well, as long as you have complete, you give, I can order you to do anything. Well, this is great, because I'm actually missing this since the time of the Knights Templars, the Pope said, The Pope came, this Pope who accepted the Jesuits thought, we don't have at the moment something that can really do the job in the way the Knights Templars were doing. The Knights Templars had been abolished.
Yeah.
Their main mission, though, was, of course, banking, and they survived. And as we know, they also survived within what became later on Freemasonry. But at the same time, the Jesuits needed a new mission, and that was education. So in the constitution that Ignazio Loyola gave to the Pope, then there was a priority to education. And that's why education was considered their weapon. I mean, if you think about it, the biggest weapon is not only the sword that the Templars could brand, or the money, of course, with the invention of things like the check. But here we're talking about rewriting history, or writing history, because the Jesuits wrote history. They are the winners always, and they write history. So when you go to a university, it might not be a Jesuit university, but you are studying things that, in a way or another, have been filtered by the Jesuit establishment.
Absolutely. And where they find all their recruits and keep the whole thing going. And wasn't their mission always that, it can take one Jesuit to overthrow a country, and that basically that's how well refined all of their training is supposed to be, and the networks. That one operative way back when they first were kicking.
Well, I tell you, there is many stories about the first Jesuits and the way they were immediately perceived as very dangerous, especially in Protestant England, in particular, where they were actually planning to kill Elizabeth I. Of course, they were, we talk about Guy Fawkes. Well, who you think was behind Guy Fawkes? So, I mean, and what happened there? I mean, there was actually a whole link to the establishment, because then in this book, I talk about the Jesuitess, the female Jesuits, which people don't know about, which are non-orders who embrace Ignazio Loyola's exercises, and they're themselves serving the Jesuits, a little bit like Isabella Rossellini in the movie Conclave. Now, like I said, complete obedience to the Pope. The vow, of course, the first three vows are of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But you also have the coadjutors, who are the ones who don't embrace priesthood. They still exist to this day. They live along the Jesuits, but they are not priests. So they don't celebrate Mass, but they are Jesuits. And then you have, like I said, the fifth class, which is not publicly disclosed. And then you have the fact that when you are in a fourth vow mission, like I have testimonies in my book. There is even one guy who was a four-bout Jesuit who ended up working, of course, as an intelligence operative during the Cold War. He was also Freemason, so he embraced Freemason, and he opened a lodge in Hungary, out of all places, during the Cold War. And he actually got married, had kids. When he went to Rome to report, because every number of years, a four-bout Jesuit, if he is required by the Black Pope, he has to go to Rome to report mouth to mouth without any other possibility of sending things in other ways. You have to be directly with the Jesuit Pope, which is the Black Pope. And when he went there, he said, and the Black Pope told them, well, we know you're married, you have a kid, doesn't matter to us. You can come and join us back whenever you want. You have done a great job.
No, yeah.
You know? So
well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm just going to throw this out there. You know, I mean, J.D. Vance being one of the last people to supposedly see the Pope alive, and he's ordered to come there. I mean, it just is very strange. I mean, Archbishop Vigano thought that, you know, Francis was already dead for like 2 months. And you know, he's been saying,
well,
you know,
let me tell you, I have, of course, people in the Vatican. I mean, I never disclose my sources, but I have, of course, people in very high places in the Vatican that regularly give me information. And when it came down to the Pope, I was myself saying, is he alive? I mean, he was at the Gemelli Hospital, where is the place, by the way, where I was born. And I asked this specific guy who was very close to Francis, so is he alive or not? You know, he told me, yes, he's alive. But at one point, they were about to give up on him. And so he was about to, you know, they take the ventilator off and he would die. However, the thing is that he still had to sign a few documents. They still needed his seal, so they kept him alive. And then he wanted to die in Santa Marta. He didn't want to die in the Gemelli Hospital because the Vatican said, okay, at this point, he has to die in the Vatican, because if he dies in a hospital, that doesn't look good. And so they brought him back to the Vatican, and I contacted one of my main contacts there, and I said, so how is he doing? And the guy was like, well, il biancone, they call him in Rome, because it's called the white one. Not il nerone is the black pope, but il biancone is doing okay. He's actually recovering. And I was like, guys, come on.
Yeah, he's got the auto pen, the auto F. Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
But having said that, he managed to be carried around a little bit like Weekend with Barney's, around St. Peter's Square for his last thing. He met, of course, J.D. Vance, and then, of course, he died. But he was about to die for the last few months of his life. He was kind of coming and going, and I think that, like I said, once he was out of the hospital, it was only a matter of time before he would cease his, without having all the stuff connected to him. It was only a matter of time before he died. But he had done his job. You see, he worked very much to prepare this conclave and very much to prepare the future of the church up to the last moment of his papacy. And before going into the Gemelli Hospital, he had signed some very important documents that, of course, were also very important for him. But they were all, if you think about the nominations, the documents that it was all against Donald J. Trump. It was almost like he was obsessed with fighting Donald J. Trump up until his last breath. So to see J.D. Vance must have been, it was, of course, initially they said maybe he will not meet Vance.
Right.
They were inventing a lot of excuses in the Vatican. Though at one point it seems like Parolin decided that because of diplomatic reasons they had to meet with Vance. And so there was a meeting, of course, with Parolini, and then there was the brief meeting that we saw with Pope Francis. Now, in regards to the papacy, as we are wrapping things up, Parolini is the candidate of the Academy of the Illuminati in Rome, but they don't have really many votes. The Jesuits, of course, he is very close to the Jesuits and all the rest, but Parolini is not a pope that at the moment is judged as universal. Universal means this, that in the last conclave in 2013, we have probably 46 states represented worldwide amongst the cardinals. Now we have something like 76. So we have an increase of parts of the world that were never heard even before.
Right.
The Pope went to the extent of nominating cardinals in the most remote and, like there were, for example, some controversial nominations in Africa where the people from that diocese says, no, we don't want this guy because he's bad, he's progressive, they are more conservative in some parts of Africa. The Pope simply opened another diocese in another part of Africa. So, I mean, he literally flexed his muscles to push his agenda.
He's pushing an anti-Western civilization agenda, basically, in all of what you're just talking about, as far as elevating the power within
then
the
you
church.
have the billions that were poured by the Chinese Communist Party, which has gathered an enormous influence. The influence that used to be of the United States of America in past conclaves, because, of course, since the Second World War, America, together with the ecclesiastical Freemasonry, had a lot of influence in the Vatican, especially after from the Second Vatican Council, but also from 1958, from the moment in which Cardinal Siri was elected and then was immediately vetoed because he was too conservative. And Siri stayed as somebody who was very annoying until the end. I mean, I remember in the conclave of 1978, I think it was the moment in which, of course, we had the Cold War and their plans were different. In the end, they got one pope to last 33 days and put him aside so they could bring John Paul II, which was, of course, a geopolitical move more than a religious move. So the fact of considering the election of the Pope as a religious thing is really far from the truth. And people say, oh, but the movie Conclave is all too political. It's about the Holy Spirit and the contemplative ways. That's all BS. And so I think that ultimately is either Cardinal Tagle, which is very close to China, and is also partly Chinese, and he doesn't know Mandarin very well, but he's quite acquainted with China and with the Patriotic Church. Mm-hmm. In my book, I explain the whole history of McCarrick and the Patriotic Church and what happened behind the scenes, also with the help of Nancy Pelosi, by the way. And then we have the others who are all African possibility, like Cardinal Turkson is very much a favorite, and also a favorite of the World Economic Forum, as he was very much close to Klaus Schwab. And, but having said that, there is no way that we're going back to this conservative mindset that maybe people like J.D. Vance hoped in a return, to that kind of Catholicism. So I think that J.D. Vance, who converted in August 2019, has probably converted viewing a church that doesn't exist anymore.
Sure.
And this is sad because, I was born in it. I didn't, I didn't have a choice. I had to grow up amongst these people. And,
But could he also have joined under the influence of somebody else? And, to become a convert to Catholicism out of the blue at that time in life, it's a bit odd. It's a bit strange considering.
But from what I heard, from his ways and from what he said and declared and everything, he definitely has a stand that is a minority within the Catholic Church, but he probably, out of naivety, because of course, if you are, when you are so old, embracing a church at that age that you don't know, you might believe things that are not really, you might even think that this, when Trump sends that meme, he's sending a specific political message to the conclave. And that message is, we know that China and those progressive forces are behind this whole thing, and we want something different. But forget Dolan. That will, if I mean, he will never be elected in a million years.
Oh.
The thing they might do would be rather to, I don't know, elect the bishop or the Archbishop of Washington, because he's a staunch anti-Trumpian. If they really had to go for somebody, they would choose somebody completely opposed to Trump, so they could, just every day with the. It's going to be obvious that if it's a Chinese Filipino Pope, we are basically seeing the first made in China Pope, and that is a complete takeover of the papacy by China. But think about it.
Do you think that would be because, to force the revelation, the red dragon of revelation, and they do a self-fulfilling prophecy stuff all the time where they.
Well, of course, that is part of Revelation. We are at the end. I mean, if you think that the Chinese Patriotic Church was founded in 1957 by Mao Zedong, I mean, and he started nominating his own bishops out of thin air, and those bishops were eventually recognized. They started to recognize them in a timid way with John Paul II. Even Ratzinger, who was opposed to that, recognized some of them, but he was still recognized as the underground church. With Francis, he had that woman pulling his hand. You remember that Chinese woman in St. Peter's Square? That was a member of the underground church who was never seen again, and who was begging him to not go on with the Vatican-China deal. That they, by the way, apparently violated certain tenets of it already, but the Vatican and Pope Francis didn't do anything. They continued to accept. Even now, in the month of April, I think the Chinese Communist Party nominated 2 bishops.
Yeah, absolutely, they did. And
so, I mean, we are talking about a church that it's out of thin air, because, Mao Zedong, what kind of episcopal lineage had? In my book, though, I explain that instrumental to the development of the Patriotic Church, there was a specific guy. This specific guy was a Jesuit who then left. He was arrested by the communists, and when he came out of his, let's say, reprogramming, this guy here, he became, he's no longer alive, but he became the key figure to develop later on the Vatican-China deal. And together with, of course, Theodore McCarrick, which was given entrance to all the seminaries and could rape all the Chinese young boys in the seminaries of China, left, right, and center with impunity. So, I mean...
yeah, absolutely. And Parolin, too, right? Parolin helped write the agreement. I mean, just in the execution of it.
Parolin is in the execution of the Vatican-China deal very influential, because he also relays on his contacts with Freemasonry and the Illuminati, especially Giuliano Di Bernardo, which I have, by the way, in volume 6.66, I even showed a picture of Parolin with Pier Giorgio Bassi, and I open up my new book in the introduction, explaining what happened one day at Borgo Santo Spirito with me and the Illuminati of the Academy in Rome, when we were working at the promotion of Angel and Demons and presenting the project to the Jesuit General. I mean, I never saw so many. I mean, they were just like kids. It's almost like I went back to Jesuit school. I mean, they were behaving like little children in front of the Jesuit General, and they were so subservient like this. And we are talking about very powerful people here, no? And they were like,
Good face. Well, look, hey, we're at an hour and 18 minutes. This has been fantastic. I want to ask you one more question, and then we're going to plug your book. Okay. A quick question. So, Father, who used to be the Italian Carmelite priest, Maria Fare, Giorgio Maria Fare, he was excommunicated by Francis last year for declaring that Francis isn't the real Pope. That Ratzinger never...
There is a lot of people who have been excommunicated during Bergoglio's papacy. I mean, Vigano has been excommunicated.
This is the point. This is my point, is that this was because he declared that Francis isn't the Pope, that Ratzinger never stepped down fully, that he said different words.
In Italy, there is that position by Don Minutella. Don Minutella, who I know has embraced this position and created Il Piccolo Resto Cattolico, which is a little sect now. But having said that, these people relay too much hope in Joseph Ratzinger as the real Pope during.
Well, it's not so much that he's the real Pope; it's that Francis never was.
No, I know that, but listen.
You think it's that's a hopeless thing? They're calling for only the 20% of the cardinals who weren't installed by Francis to form a separate conclave.
Never gonna happen.
And that's just pipe dream. It's just
pipe
never.
Dream. And I know the guy who spread this whole research. He's a journalist called Andrea Cionci, and he's a young guy who followed me when I was, I'm much older than him, so he has followed me in my early battles against the Vatican since I started to expose him and all that. Listen, the thing is this: once you have the ring and the seal, it doesn't matter if you are the legitimate Pope or not. You are the ones sealing the documents. So.
And you don't think that's why he was buried outside? That he chose to be buried outside?
No. The burial is a completely different topic, which I describe here. It's to do with the ancient worship of Cybele, of Isis, the birth of the Collegium Romanum, as well as the Basilica of Santa Maria Major is a very important. And then it's connected to the Salus Romani, which is another thing connected to China, but Matteo Ricci. It's a bit complicated to explain all.
All right, we're gonna have to read the book to find out. It's so interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah,
there will be people who will push for a schism the moment they realize that this whole process is rigged. But having said that, there will be always a minority. And Bergoglio was very authoritarian in his ways. That's why he excommunicated an unprecedented amount of priests during his papacy. But there is no, the fact to say, but in that moment, when Ratzinger was the Pope Emeritus, in reality, he was the real Pope. I would like to remind those people that Pope Joseph Ratzinger, like I explain in my book, was responsible for one of the worst documents of Vatican II, and he participated in Vatican II. So you are pushing for a guy who had an homosexual relation with Father Gergwer. Guys, you're insane. It's like basically stating, I don't know, there is nothing better of Joseph. Of course, Joseph Ratzinger was a staunch theologian with a more conservative mindset. I myself, when I met him in front of me, he looked like, the wizard with the incense.
He looks like Emperor Palpatine, yeah.
He was very much. But the thing is that he had done nothing to fight pedophilia when he was in charge of the Congregation for the Mothers of Faith. That is serious stuff, guys. And so I don't know what these people are talking about.
Well, I think it's not so much that he's the real Pope as much as Francis isn't the real Pope.
Listen, can I say something? There is no real Pope after 1958. That's it.
They're like, there is no real Pope.
1958, the real Pope was supposed to be Cardinal Siri. The moment in which they intervened and removed Cardinal Siri from that conclave, as well as other conclaves that apparently successive ones, where Pope Montini, for example, was elected, Roncalli was Freemason, Montini was a Freemason. It started a completely different situation in the Vatican, and there is no turning back. So these people are living of people even go after the fact, but Cardinal Siri nominated, and in fact I talk about in Volume 3 a priest from Vietnam who came in the last moments of his life, and so the real church is still alive in a couple of people who might have, or maybe who are in the sede vacancy, so maybe even Lefebvre spoke. Guys, the problem is that this church that you see behind me is most of all a human construct. It's not the Church of Jesus. So the moment in which you start talking about this stuff, then we can go back to the fact that in reality it's a human construct, because there were no popes at the beginning of the church. And in fact, the document which I talk about in this, which the Jesuits and Pope Francis have sanctioned last year, admits that. And so people will say, but are you, promoting what the Jesuits are saying or Pope Francis? No, I'm just saying that now, after 2,000 years, that they don't need anymore the papacy because it's an obstruction towards unifying all Christian churches, they come out and say, oh no, we were just joking. Ignatius of Antioch, which was another Ignatius, it seems that this name is pretty ominous in the church. Ignatius of Antioch constructed the whole thing. He invented out of thin air that Peter was a pope and transmitted the papacy to other people. It's just a human construct. Jesus, unfortunately, under the hands of the Jesuits, was also manipulated. In my book, I talk about how the Jesuits went into the Vatican archives, burning documents to hide the real nature of Jesus. So if you want to continue to believe in Jesuit lies, just go on with the show. But I mean, I'm born Catholic. But when they say, what kind of Catholic am I? I'm a Sedevacantist, and I'm a preconciliary one. I don't believe in anything after 1958. So that's it. And of course, because of my DNA, because of hundreds and hundreds of years of history with the church, which I also talk about in my book, ancestors who were, you know, sergeant in arms of the Knights Templars, as well as people involved with the first Jesuit college in Messina. But me, myself, Leo Zagami, you know, said, but why are you not reborn? Why don't you reborn in something? There's nothing to reborn. We are what we are born with. And I'm carrying on this whole curse of being, because at the end of this book, I finally revealed the curse. So when I reveal that,
don't reveal it. Don't reveal it. Make people have to go get the get the book.
I will just show the face and the name, and you can go on Wikipedia and you can study who this guy was and this other guy. And if you see the surname, maybe you will understand what I'm talking about.
Carlos Aldana. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that's it. Check out the book, and we speak soon, my dear.
Absolutely. So people go to leozagami.com. I hear it's off the charts there on Amazon. They're selling like hotcakes. So people who want to get this edition, go pick up a book. Go to leozagami.com.
Absolutely. leozagami.com or amazon.com. At the moment, is one of the best sellers in several categories, including faith and spirituality, history of religion, and also controversial religious knowledge, of course. And it's definitely a book that is going to make you understand better what is this new Pope all about, even before they make him, and even after they make him.
Fantastic.
That's it.
Wow, what timing. That's God timing.
Take care.
Bye, Leo. See you soon. Wow, amazing. Woo, I'll tell you, that guy can talk, and I love it. So that's incredible. You got to go check out his book. The name again here is, let me see if I have it in front of me. It's one of his, he likes like 17th century titles that are about 30 words long. And basically it's Confessions of the Illuminati, of an Illuminati, volume 12. History, secret societies, and the politics of the Jesuit New World Order and their Luciferian court. There you go. Okay, so go buy the book. I'm excited. Mine's on the way. I can't wait to read it. I read through the table of contents. That's why I was able to check out, you know, ask him these different questions about various topics. But just amazing. And there's so much news besides that I wish I could have reported on today. But I'm so glad to be back with you. Again, thanks so much for supporting the channel. If you found this interview to be rewarding, to be adding value at this time during the conclave forming and Trump taking on the Jesuits and everything going on here, and you want the channel to keep doing more videos like this, there's ways to support the channel below. So thanks so much for being back on You Are Free TV. We'll be finding out about the conclave here in the next next 24 hours, basically. And we'll be back to talk about it. So thanks so much for your support, and I will see you next time. You are free.